There was a time when the skies still roared with joy, when the gods drank mead from golden horns and laughed as if the world would never end. In those days, Thor walked among them, not as a distant deity, but as a presence impossible to ignore, loud, as thunder, bright as the sun striking steel. He was the protector of Midgard, the hammer wielder, the giant slayer, the stormbringer. When his chariot tore across the sky, pulled by his goats, mortals looked up in fear and awe, knowing that somewhere someone had angered the heavens. But even gods are not beyond fate. Long before the fires of Ragnarok licked the roots of Yggdrasil, before the world turned to ash, a serpent stirred in the deep. Born of Loki and the giantess Angerboda Jörmungandr, known as the Midgard serpent, was cast into the sea by the gods, for its body was too long, its hunger too vast, its destiny too dangerous. Yet the sea did not kill it. The sea cradled it, fed it, nursed it until it grew so large that it encircled the world, biting its own tail in an eternal loop of silence and venom. Thor knew the serpent. He had met it before, once in disguise, once in dream, once in rage. Their hatred was not spoken, but it lived in the marrow of myth, in the prophecy whispered by seers who dared speak of the end. It was said that when the serpent rose, Thor would meet it in battle, that they would destroy one another, that lightning would crash against poison and the world would hold its breath before breaking. But Thor did not dwell on prophecy. Not then. Not in the days when Asgard still gleamed and Midgard still thrived. He fought giants. He broke mountains. He drank with gods and wrestled with storms. And yet, even in his moments of greatest triumph, the shadow of the serpent lingered, in the corners of his dreams, in the silence after battle, in the whisper of the sea. Thor did not fear death. He feared silence, a world without thunder, a sky without wrath. That was what Jörmungandr threatened, not merely his life, but his purpose. And purpose once shaken is the beginning of the end. It started with a dream not his own, but that of a Völva, a seeress buried in the woods of Midgard, old as roots, blind in both eyes, yet seeing further than the gods themselves. Her voice carried through ravens, through branches, through the wind itself, until it found Odin. She spoke of fire rising from the south, of ships made of nails, of brothers turning swords on each other, of gods falling not in betrayal, but in design. And at the center of it all, a serpent rising from the sea eyes, burning like drowned suns. And thunder. Thunder that struck so hard it split the earth, yet still could not silence the hiss. Odin listened, and Odin knew. He called Thor to him, not as a father, not as a ruler, but as one god who had seen too much calling to another, who still believed that strength could defy time. Ragnarok comes, Odin said. I will crush it, Thor replied. But Odin did not smile. You cannot crush what was born to kill you. Thor stood hand on Mjölnir, eyes smouldering. Then I will take it with me. There was nothing left to say. From that moment, Thor trained not as a warrior, but as an ending. He fought not for glory, but for impact. He watched the skies, more often studied. The tides walked the beaches of Midgard, where fishermen spoke of strange tremors in the deeps. He felt it, Jörmungandr coiled and dreaming, aware that the end was near. Asgard too began to shift. The laughter grew quieter, the mead less sweet. The gods, once immortal in pride, began to whisper to each other. Even Loki grew solemn. Even Freya, queen of passion and sorrow, wept for reasons she could not name. Because they all knew the serpent would rise. And when it did, Thor would go to meet it, not to win, but to become legend. The wind turned colder. Not the kind of cold that comes with season, but the kind that seeps into bone, a cold that does not pass but waits. The gods of Asgard grew restless. Valkyries flew faster between realms, their wings stretched tighter, their eyes darker. Odin sat longer on Hlidskjalf, unmoving. Even the ravens that once laughed now returned with silence, clinging to their feathers. The skies above grew still, as though the storm had stopped breathing, and the waters of Midgard whispered in circles. Thor walked alone. He walked without his goats, without his companions, without even the sound of Mjölnir humming at his side. He walked the shorelines of the world, where the sea foamed like teeth, and the rocks sang old lullabies. He spoke to fishermen who had seen things in the deep they refused to name. He listened to the silence between waves. He watched as birds refused to cross the ocean, as the wind turned its back on the water. And then he saw it. Not the serpent itself, but the sign. A carcass of a whale split not by storm or rock, but by venom. It stank of things the world should not remember: acid and salt, and something colder than death. Its eyes had turned inward, its flesh sagged away from the bone, as if it had tried to flee from its own end. Thor did not turn away. He knelt, he touched the wound, and in that moment the thunder within him rumbled. Jörmungandr was moving. He returned to Asgard only once after that, not to speak but to look. He walked the golden halls like a ghost. He stood beside Sif and did not speak of what he had seen. He looked at his sons, Magni and Modi, and only said, "Remember what the sky feels like when it breaks." He touched Mjölnir one last time, as if to remind it of their promise of the oaths they had taken beneath fire and storm, and then he left. No one followed. They knew better. He journeyed north, past the frozen wastes, past the mountains that once echoed with giant songs, past the last trees that still remembered the time before gods. He walked until the stars vanished behind clouds, and the sea called him forward. And the sea answered. The waters split not like a curtain, but like a wound opening, and from the depths rose a sound, a hiss older than language. It did not rise in fury. It rose in inevitability. The serpent had awakened. Thor stood upon the cliff's edge watching as the sea churned with shapes too large to name. The tide receded, not away from him, but away from itself, as if the ocean had grown afraid of what it held. Thunder cracked once low and slow rolling like a drumbeat, meant only for one pair of ears. Mjölnir leapt into Thor's hand. He did not smile. He stepped into the water. Each step sank deeper, not just into the ocean, but into myth. He was no longer a god. He was a purpose. The wind circled him, confused, uncertain if it should scream or weep. The sky turned grey, not with rain, but with waiting. Thor walked until the waves swallowed him whole, and still he did not stop. He walked until the world itself forgot he had ever stood on land. And beneath, in the belly of the deep, the serpent opened its eyes. There are things older than fear. Jörmungandr was one of them. It did not slither like an eel or coil like a snake. It moved like thought, like fate, like the moment before a scream. Its body encircled the world, not because it wished to, but because it had to. It was not anger that moved it. It was destiny. It knew Thor. It remembered the taste of thunder, the scent of lightning, the echo of a hammer that had once struck its skull in a forgotten encounter, when time itself had looked away. It rose not to conquer. It rose to meet. And Thor, in the blackness beneath the waves, saw the glow of its eyes, two twin suns drowned in poison, and raised his hammer. The water cracked. Not the sea, the water itself. Sound vanished, light shattered. The serpent struck. Fangs met storm. Coil met will. Poison met defiance. And the world trembled. In Asgard the sky split. In Midgard tides crashed in places where tides had never reached. In Jotunheim frost giants turned toward the sea in silence. And Odin, still seated on his throne, closed his remaining eye. Because he knew the battle had begun, and only one would rise again. There are battles that echo across plains through steel and blood and the cries of armies. There are wars remembered for their heroes, for their banners, for the sound of swords meeting shields. And then there is this, a war with no spectators, a clash witnessed only by the sea itself and the silent bones buried beneath it. Here in the blackened depths beneath Midgard's oceans, the storm and the serpent danced not in fury, but in finality. Thor struck first. Mjölnir, ancient and alive, tore through water like it tore through air. Lightning did not flash. It burned a pulse of skyfire that split the waves and seared through scales harder than stone. But Jörmungandr, endless in length, wrapped itself like a prophecy fulfilled. Its coils encircled Thor, not once, not twice, but thrice, and each loop constricted not just his body, but the very space around him. The sea groaned not in rage, but in pain, unable to contain what had never meant to meet. The serpent bit. Its fangs found flesh, not armor, not magic, flesh. It pierced Thor's side with venom that had stewed for centuries, venom that had waited for only this one moment, and it did not ask for permission. It invaded his blood, his lungs, his roar. But Thor did not falter. He did not collapse. Instead, he laughed. It was not joy. It was not madness. It was inevitability laughing in the face of prophecy. With one hand, he gripped the serpent's jaw. With the other, he raised Mjölnir again. And he struck not once, not twice, but again and again, each blow echoing across the ocean floor like the heartbeat of a dying god. Scale cracked, flesh tore, blood spilled. Not red, but black, thick as shadow, ancient as time. The water hissed as it boiled around them, turning from sea to mist, from mist to steam, until even the sky above wept. But Jörmungandr did not die easily. It coiled tighter. It thrashed with force enough to topple mountains. Its tail rose from the ocean's far side and slapped down with a scream, drowning the coasts of Midgard in waves 100 feet high. Villages vanished. Ships were swallowed whole. Creatures of the deep fled in silence, knowing that even they had no place in this kind of ending. Still Thor struck, his bones shattered with each impact. His breath came in rattles, the venom worked deeper. His vision blurred, not with fear, but with certainty. He would die here. It was written. It had always been written. But he would not die alone. He wrapped his legs around the serpent's jaw, pulled it open with a strength that came not from muscle, but from will. With one last scream, half god, half storm, he summoned all the thunder that remained within him, and drove Mjölnir through the roof of its mouth. And the world stopped. The sky turned white. The ocean stood still. And for a moment the serpent did not move. Then it convulsed. Its body thrashed, tearing the sea apart, striking the ocean floor so hard the earth cracked. But the thunder was already inside it. The hammer had struck not just flesh, but fate. And fate had no defense against defiance so pure. Jörmungandr died with its jaws open. It died with its coils unraveling not around the world, but into memory. And Thor stood. He stood atop the serpent's head. His body broken, his skin burned, his veins blackened by poison. He looked toward the sky, not for salvation, not for witness, but for the final flash of lightning that would remind the world of his name. He took one step forward, then another. Then he stumbled. The venom surged, and with a breath that tasted of salt steel and prophecy, he fell. Not in failure, but in purpose. His body landed beside the serpent he had slain, the two titans of end times, locked forever in silence. Not enemies, not rivals, complements. And in that moment, far above the ocean, far beyond the clouds, the sound of thunder rolled once more, not in mourning, but in remembrance, because Thor had not died in vain. He had slain the end of the world, and in doing so, he had bought a heartbeat more for all that still lived. There was silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that follows something so vast, so final, that even sound is afraid to return. The ocean torn apart began to close its wounds. The clouds above drifted aimlessly lost without the pull of storm. Midgard, bruised and battered, held its breath. And in that stillness, the body of Thor lay beside the broken coil of Jörmungandr, two titans brought down by the gravity of destiny. No birds flew overhead. No god wept in the skies. No song dared rise. And yet something moved. From the edge of the sea, the wind crept in soft at first, then stronger as though searching for the thunder that once commanded it. It brushed against Thor's brow as if begging him to rise again. But thunder does not rise. It rolls. It fades. And then it waits. In Asgard, Odin bowed his head. Not in grief. In respect. He had known this moment would come. He had seen it in the threads of fate, in the runes burned into bark and bone in the eyes of the Norns who never blinked. But knowing does not lessen the weight. Thor was not just his son. Thor was the last barrier between chaos and creation. And now, with that barrier broken, the end marched closer. But something unexpected remained. The serpent was dead, truly dead. And with it, a thread had been severed, not one woven by the Norns, but one knotted by prophecy. This was not how it was meant to unfold. Thor was meant to die, yes, but not before the fire, not before the wolf, not before the sky itself cracked open and fell. And yet here it was, Ragnarok had begun, but not as written. Because of Thor, because of that final strike. Because he had not waited for the end to come. He had gone to meet it first. And that choice, defiant, reckless, heroic had changed everything. In Midgard, the storm ceased. The people huddled and soaked and praying for mercy looked to the horizon and saw no waves, only calm. They did not know what had happened. They did not see the battle, but they felt it. In their bones, in their blood, in the sudden stillness that felt like a debt paid. And far beyond the reach of mortal eyes, in a realm untouched by time, the tree groaned. Yggdrasil trembled not from pain, but from surprise. It had felt the death of the serpent, yes, but it had also felt something else, something new, a tear in the pattern, a freedom, because when Thor struck that final blow, he did more than kill a beast. He broke a cycle, the prophecy that bound gods and mortals alike, that tied each life to a single story, had been pierced like flesh by a hammer's edge, and through that wound, possibility bled, not salvation, not certainty, but possibility. Magni and Modi, sons of Thor, found their father's body before the sea swallowed it again. They stood on either side of him, one with fire in his heart, the other with calm in his blood, and they did not cry. They lifted him together with hands that had once learned to wield Mjölnir in play, and now with reverence they carried him toward the edge of the world. The gods lit no pyre, they built no tomb. They knew Thor would not rest in death as others did. He would rumble beneath the clouds. He would crack through the roots of the tree. He would be the storm that reminded every being mortal or divine that courage does not stop the end. It defines it. And so the world turned. The fire giants still gathered in Muspelheim. Fenrir still howled in the distance. Ragnarok would still come, but it would come differently, because one god had not waited for doom to arrive. He had struck first. He had acted, and in doing so he had shown that prophecy may speak of death, but it says nothing of meaning. Thor's death meant something. It echoed louder than any thunder he had ever summoned. It sang not of finality, but of defiance, of a god who chose his end, and in that choice, perhaps, the world was reborn. The serpent was dead. The thunder had fallen. But somewhere deep in the marrow of the universe, the sound of a storm beginning again stirred. Because thunder, like legend, always returns.